The invitation never came, of course. I only knew about my parents' annual foundation gala because I saw it on my brother's Instagram story, a glittering spectacle I was clearly never meant to be a part of. Still, some foolish, stubborn part of me decided to show up, to try one last time. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, the nicest thing I owned, and was immediately swallowed by a sea of diamonds and designer labels. In a room built on performance, I was a ghost, a quiet, unwelcome truth wandering through the fiction of their perfect world. At the center of it all, my family held court. There was my father, Richard, a man who measured human value in stock tickers and social standing. Beside him was my mother, Eleanor, a woman whose love was a prize awarded only for achievements she could brag about at the country club. And between them stood the reason for the entire event, my brother Alex, the family's effortlessly charming golden child. He was beaming, basking in the glow of being named junior partner at Dad's firm, a title I knew had been gifted, not earned. I moved closer, thinking maybe, just maybe, they would see me. That's when I heard it. My father was speaking to a man with a politician's smile, gesturing vaguely in my direction without even making eye contact with me. He leaned in, and the words floated across the champagne-fueled chatter, clear as a bell. "That's my daughter, Clara," he muttered, his voice thick with a casual sort of disdain. "An artistic soul." What a disappointment. The words didn't just sting, they landed with the crushing weight of a final judgment. Disappointment. That one word was an echo of every missed school play, every ignored achievement, every conversation cut short to ask about Alex. It was the entire internal ledger of my life summed up in a single dismissive breath. I just stood there, frozen, the noise of the party fading into a low hum. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to steel. I was about to turn and walk out of their lives forever. But then, the world stopped. To understand what happened that night at the gala, to understand the silence that fell over that room, you have to understand the story my family had been telling themselves for 20 years. My father's muttered word, disappointment, wasn't the start of the story. It was the title page. His cruelty wasn't a surprise, it was a summary of every chapter that had come before it. It was the loudest echo of a narrative they had perfected, one where there was only ever room for one star, and I was cast as the permanent backstage shadow. A shadow they thought they knew but had never truly seen. The most vivid chapter is the one about my brother Alex's first BMW. He was 17, and my parents had gifted him the car for his birthday, a machine far too powerful for a boy with an ego to match. I remember the phone call in the middle of the night, the frantic tone in my mother's voice. Alex had wrapped the car around an old oak tree on a back road. When we got there, the first thing I noticed wasn't his fear or remorse. It was his annoyance. He was pacing, angry about the car, angry at the inconvenience of it all, as if the tree had deliberately jumped in his way. My father, Richard, immediately went into damage control, his voice a low, urgent hum of lawyers and insurance claims. My mother, Eleanor, rushed past the twisted metal to fuss over Alex, checking for scratches on him while ignoring the wreckage he'd caused. There was no lecture, no discussion of his recklessness, just a seamless, unified effort to erase the consequences. A week later, a new, identical BMW sat in the driveway. As they handed him the keys, I felt the familiar weight of the internal ledger. I didn't just see a car, I saw the photography class I was told we couldn't afford, the second-hand laptop I had to buy myself for college, the endless chorus of money is tight, Clara that was apparently only sung for me. The lesson was clear, Alex's comfort was a necessity, while my needs were always optional. A year later, I wrote a different story for myself. I was 18 and I held a thick, heavy envelope in my hands. It was an acceptance letter from Georgetown, but more than that, it was a full 4-year government scholarship for my work in linguistics. I had earned it. Every late night, every book, every ounce of effort was mine alone. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding with a pride I had never felt before, and handed the letter to my parents. My mother glanced at it, her eyes barely registering the words. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive praise. "Very practical." My father simply grunted from behind his newspaper. "Well," he said, "at least it saves us some money." That was it. There was no celebration, no moment of pride, not even a real smile. My success was quiet, academic, and worst of all, it cost them nothing and gave them no new status to brag about. It was just a practical, boring little achievement from their practical, boring daughter. I remember retreating to my room, the heavy letter feeling flimsy and worthless in my hand. They had thrown a lavish party when Alex got into the same school, likely thanks to a hefty legacy donation. My full scholarship, earned on pure merit, didn't even warrant a celebratory dinner. I realized then that their validation was a spotlight, and they only ever pointed it at the son who reflected their own ambitions back at them. So I let them believe their own story. To their friends, I was the odd, quiet daughter working some boring government admin job in DC. It was the perfect narrative for them because it required no explanation and invited no further questions. Clara is just finding herself, my mother would say with a sigh, painting a picture of me as a lost little bird, forever struggling to leave the nest. They had no idea I had built a fortress instead. I remember once, at a rare family dinner, my mother noticed a thin white scar on my forearm. "Goodness, Clara, how did you manage that?" she asked. I smiled and gave her the lie I had rehearsed. "Oh, just tripped over a filing cabinet at work. You know how clumsy I am." I didn't tell her it was from a knife disarmament exercise that went wrong during training at the farm. Another time, I was on the phone for Christmas, forced to listen to Alex describe his new ski condo in Aspen. The conversation was a monument to his success and their pride. Midway through his monologue, my secure line buzzed. A high-priority, coded alert. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hey guys, I have to run," I said, my voice deliberately flat and unimpressive. "My boss needs me to sort some old archives." The lie tasted like ash, but it was necessary. It was the price of admission for my real life, a life where my skills mattered more than my last name, a life of consequence and purpose that they could never, and would never, understand. The loneliness of that divide was staggering. They had spent 2 decades writing my story for me. I was the prologue they skipped to get to the main event, their son. They had no idea I was the protagonist of a thriller they weren't even cleared to read. That cold, lonely feeling in my dorm room after the scholarship celebration became my ground zero. It was the moment I finally accepted a fundamental truth. My family was a country I could never be a citizen of. Their approval was a visa I would never be granted. So, I stopped trying to cross the border. I turned around and decided to map my own world, to find a place where my specific skills weren't a strange footnote, but the entire language. I stopped seeking their love and started seeking a purpose they couldn't touch. That purpose found me in my sophomore year, in the form of a man named Professor Albright, a quiet international relations teacher whose unassuming tweed jackets hid a past spent in the world's most volatile regions. He never focused on my grades. Instead, he saw the things my parents had always dismissed. My fluency in Farsi, my methodical approach to solving complex strategic problems, my unnerving calm during high-stress debates. One afternoon, he asked me to stay after class. He looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen before and asked a question that changed everything. "Clara," he said, "have you ever considered serving your country in a capacity that most people don't even know exists?" It was the first time anyone had seen my strengths as something valuable. My training at the CIA's facility known as the Farm was more than just learning tradecraft. It was a complete deconstruction of the person my family thought I was. The grueling physical tests, the psychological deep dives, the constant pressure. It was all designed to find your breaking point. But for me, it was a place of construction. Here, my last name meant nothing. My father's influence couldn't reach me. I was judged solely on my results, my loyalty, and my resilience. It was the ultimate meritocracy, and in that crucible, I was reborn. They gave me a new name, a call sign. I was no longer just Clara. I was Miles. This new life was my sanctuary, and the secrecy was its walls. Of course, it was a professional necessity, a matter of national security. But for me, it was also a personal shield. Behind the curtain of my classified life, their narrative couldn't find me. Their casual disappointment, their praise for Alex, their complete and utter inability to see me, none of it could penetrate the layers of my work. It was my private victory, a world I had built where I was not just seen, but valued. I built a new life in the shadows, not out of spite but for survival. I never planned to show it to them. But that night, at their gala, the shadows came into the light. We returned to that moment, suspended in the silent air of the gala. My father's words, "What a disappointment," are still hanging there, and the decision has finally been made for me. There is nothing left to say, nothing left to try for. I feel a strange calm settle over me, the kind of peace that comes when you finally stop fighting a battle you were never meant to win. I take a deep, steadying breath, preparing to turn my back on them, on all of it, for the last time. I am about to take that first step into my own life, a life completely free of their judgment, when the music grinds to a sudden, screeching halt. A heavy, profound silence drops over the ballroom. Every head turns towards the grand entrance as the ornate doors swing open with a force that is anything but gentle. Two men step inside, dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits that do nothing to hide the rigid discipline of their posture. They don't walk, they move with a predatory economy of motion that makes the wealthy, powerful men in the room look like soft, harmless boys. They are followed by two more. Their eyes, cold and analytical, sweep the room, and the bubble of champagne-fueled celebration doesn't just burst, it evaporates. The air crackles with a new kind of authority, one that cannot be bought or inherited. One of the men detaches from the group and begins to cross the floor. He is tall, with a severe face that looks like it was carved from granite. I know him. It is Agent Coulson, a senior field operative whose reputation for ruthless efficiency is legendary within the agency. My father, Richard, ever the master of his domain, puffs out his chest, a question forming on his lips, but Coulson's gaze slices right past him as if he were a statue. The sea of glittering guests parts for him, a silent, instinctual deference to a power they don't understand but absolutely recognize. His eyes scan the room once, then lock onto mine with unnerving precision. And as he walks towards me, every single person in that ballroom, my mother, my brother, my father, all turned to stare at me. The invisible child was suddenly, blindingly visible. He stops directly in front of me, his presence a stark, imposing contrast to the opulence around us. The entire world seems to be holding its breath. "Agent Miles," he says, his voice perfectly calm but carrying with absolute clarity through the dead silence. "Apologies for the intrusion." He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle. "We have a situation. The director is on a secure line for you. He's here." The name, my real name, hangs in the air, an impossible sound in this impossible setting. "Agent Miles." I see the words hit my family like a physical blow. My father's jaw literally unhinges, his face a perfect mask of slack-jawed disbelief. My mother's hand flies to her throat, a small, choked gasp escaping her lips as she looks from me to the stone-faced man in front of me. And my brother, Alex, the golden child, the center of this universe, looks completely and utterly lost, his confident smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by the naked confusion of a man whose entire reality has just been upended. They are all staring at me, at the daughter, the sister they thought was a simple artistic failure. They are trying to reconcile that person with the name Agent, and their minds are short-circuiting. Just as the silence becomes unbearable, another figure emerges from the doorway. He is older, dressed in a suit that is less flashy but carries 10 times the authority. This is a man who walks with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who controls global events from a soundproof room. This is the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He glides past the other agents, his eyes fixed only on me. He gives my father a passing glance so utterly dismissive that it's more insulting than any shout could ever be. He stops beside Coulson, and he speaks directly to me, his voice low and urgent. "Miles," he says, the name now sounding like a command. "Walk with me. We have an active threat in the Eastern European sector. Your expertise is required." As I turn to follow him, flanked by men whose power my father could only dream of, I allow myself one last look at the family I am leaving behind. They are standing exactly as they were, frozen in a tableau of shattered pride and profound confusion. Their perfect world, their flawless narrative, had been publicly and irreversibly dismantled. And the person who did it was their greatest disappointment. As I walked out of that ballroom, flanked by the director himself, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence they left behind was louder than any argument I could have ever made. The moment I stepped into the secure vehicle, the world of the Gala vanished. It was replaced by the low hum of encrypted electronics and the calm, focused energy of the team. Inside the car, my personal phone, which I'd placed on the seat beside me, began to light up like a frantic emergency beacon. The screen was a rolling cascade of notifications. Texts from my mother, Eleanor, filled with question marks and frantic pleas. Texts from my brother, Alex, a jumble of angry, confused demands. And then the voicemails from my father, Richard, each one a miniature explosion of impotent rage and wounded pride. I watched the screen flash for a moment, a silent movie of my family's world imploding. There was no anger in me, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of distance. It was like watching a storm on a faraway planet. I picked up the phone, held down the power button, and watched the screen go dark. As the last light faded, I put the device away in my bag. Through my earpiece, the first details of the mission were already coming through. My mind shifted, the noise of my old life replaced by a new, sharper signal. The drama was over. It was time to get to work. Over the next 72 hours, the gala became a distant, ridiculous memory. My world wasn't about champagne and social standing. It was about deciphering satellite photos of a hidden convoy, cross-referencing chatter from 3 different languages, and making strategic recommendations based on incomplete intelligence. It was a silent, high-stakes chess match played across continents. While my family was reeling from a bruised ego, I was briefing a committee on a situation that had the potential to destabilize an entire region. Their crisis was about perception, mine was about reality. The comparison was so absurd it was almost funny. One evening, between reports, I allowed myself a small, tired smile. My father had called me a disappointment, but the truth was, his entire world had just become disappointingly small. Weeks later, after the operation was complete, I learned of my father's attempts to find me. It was almost pitiable. He had done what he always did. He tried to use his influence. He called old friends in government, contacts at lobbying firms, anyone he thought owed him a favor, demanding to know about Agent Miles. He thought his name, his money, and his power could unlock any door. But the doors he was knocking on now were different. He was met with a series of polite but unbreachable brick walls. He was told that such information was classified. He was told that no such person worked in that department. He was told in no uncertain terms to stop asking. I imagined him in his big leather chair, his face turning red with frustration, a powerful man realizing for the first time that there were levels of power in the world he couldn't even comprehend, and his daughter operated within them. My new life had no room for him. I found my sense of place not in a sprawling mansion, but in the quiet, purposeful hum of the Langley headquarters. My family was no longer the one I was born into, but the one I had earned. It was the analyst across from me who could finish my sentences on geopolitical theory, the field agent who trusted my intel with his life, the director who saw me not as a disappointment, but as a vital asset. Here, I was valued for my mind and my abilities. I was respected. One morning, standing before a global map in a briefing room with a warm cup of coffee in my hands, a feeling washed over me. It wasn't victory. It was peace. It was the feeling of finally being home. One last thread from my old life found me about a month after that. A letter, routed through a dozen secure channels, finally landed on my desk. It was from my father. I read it once. There was no apology, no glimmer of understanding. It was a long, rambling letter filled with demands for an explanation, accusations of betrayal, and then the real reason for writing. A desperate, thinly veiled request for me to use my new connections to help Alex out of a serious legal jam he had gotten himself into. I put the letter down on my desk, the words leaving no mark on me. They hadn't changed. They never would. But their opinion was no longer part of my mission briefing. I spent my life trying to earn a seat at their table, never realizing my destiny was to lead a table of my own. If you've ever had to become your own hero when no one else would step up, drop a story in the comments below. I see you.